The sensation of cold marble seeped through the thin cotton of his t-shirt. Leo blinked, the world swimming into focus as harsh, fluorescent light glared down from a vaulted ceiling. A low murmur of shocked voices surrounded him. He was on his knees in the middle of a grand, circular chamber, its walls lined with dark wood and flags bearing unfamiliar crests. Dozens of men in tailored suits and military uniforms stared, their expressions a mixture of alarm and cold assessment. He looked up, and his breath hitched. On a raised dais, flanking a younger man in a formal chair, sat Alexander Sterling. His face was Leo's own, but refined by an edge of absolute authority. Dark hair, impeccably styled, framed sharp, intelligent features. He wore a suit of deep charcoal, his posture relaxed, one hand resting casually on the arm of his chair. A faint, polite smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes, the same shade of hazel as Leo's, held a detached, analytical chill. The system's briefing echoed in his mind. This is your future self. In this timeline, you will become Alexander Sterling, the man who effectively controls the nation from behind the title of Special Envoy to the President. Leo had scoffed. He was a college sophomore who coasted on family money and a quick wit, more likely to be known for throwing epic parties than orchestrating political coups. He swallowed, finding his voice. "I'm security." Alexander's voice cut through the tense silence, smooth and commanding. It was unnerving to hear his own vocal cords produce such a chilling tone. This individual's appearance is a disturbing breach. Remove him. Strong hands clamped onto Leo's arms, forcing him down. A gag was shoved unceremoniously into his mouth. He could only watch as Alexander adjusted the cuff of his jacket, his gaze drifting over Leo's face with idle curiosity. In that moment, Leo saw it, a glint of malicious amusement in those familiar eyes. Take him to the secured holding facility. Terminate the threat. The words were delivered with the casual finality of someone ordering lunch. Leo's struggles were useless against the trained guards. He was dragged across the polished floor, the stunned faces of the assembly blurring past. A sterile, white hallway, a soundproof door, the cold muzzle of a weapon pressed against the back of his neck. The world went dark. He came to with a jolt, the smell of damp earth and pine filling his nostrils. Rain filtered through a dense canopy of redwoods, the only sound the steady drip from soaked branches. He was crouched behind a moss-covered log. Ahead, on a muddy service road, a black sedan sat riddled with bullet holes. Bodies in dark suits lay motionless nearby. One figure leaned against the car's hood, clutching his side. Alexander. His expensive suit was torn and stained dark. Even in the gloom, Leo could see the pallor of his face. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. The memory of that sterile room and the cold gun was still fresh. But the system's directive was a constant hum in his skull. This is you. You have to reach him. He took a shaky breath and stepped out. If you trust me, I can get you out of here. Alexander's head snapped up. Exhaustion and pain warred with instant suspicion in his gaze. He studied Leo's face, the identical features, for a long, tense second. The distant crack of a branch decided it. He gave a tight, grim nod. Do it. With the system providing vague directional prompts, Leo helped him stumble into the thicker woods. They found a shallow depression beneath the roots of a giant sequoia. Alexander slumped against the bark, his breathing shallow, and lost consciousness. Leo spent the night there, using strips torn from his own shirt to stem the bleeding as best he could, listening to the sounds of the forest and the distant, fading search. Dawn light was filtering through the trees when the crunch of heavy boots approached. Two armed figures emerged from the mist. Leo tried to drag Alexander deeper into cover, his mind racing. This is it. This is how I earn his trust. As one of the men raised a rifle, Alexander's eyes flew open. In a motion fueled by pure survival instinct, he shoved Leo forward, directly into the line of fire. The impact was a hot, brutal punch to Leo's chest. He crumpled, the world tilting. He looked up, blood bubbling on his lips, into Alexander's face. It was a mask of cold necessity, devoid of any recognition or remorse. "You son of a bitch," Leo choked out before the darkness took him again. The third time, Leo refused. The system, glitching, deposited him anyway in the middle of a bustling farmer's market in a city square. The smell of fresh bread and roasted coffee was a cruel contrast to the phantom pain in his chest. He kept his head down, bought a cheap baseball cap, and decided survival was the only mission. He found a room in a rundown boarding house, paying cash. Fate, it seemed, had other ideas. A week later, while debating the merits of different brands of instant noodles in a convenience store, a polished black town car pulled up to the curb. The rear window slid down, revealing Alexander Sterling. He showed no surprise, only a mild, intrigued arch of an eyebrow that was so like Leo's own mannerism it was unsettling. "A remarkable coincidence," Alexander said, his voice pleasant. "Would you care for a proper meal? I find myself curious." Wary but trapped, Leo accepted. He was ushered into a world of sleek penthouses, silent bodyguards, and exquisite, tasteless meals. Alexander was charming, erudite, and wielded his power with a subtle, graceful menace. The angry, wounded animal from the woods was gone, replaced by a sophisticated predator. Leo, raised in the sheltered, affluent bubble of his family's estate, found his defenses slowly worn down. Maybe there was a reason. Maybe the first 2 times were just bad timing. He was a fool. At a gala fundraiser at the city's modern art museum, chaos erupted. Masked gunmen stormed the hall. In the panic, Leo, mistaken for Alexander due to their identical faces, was targeted. He saw the gunmen focus on him, raise their weapons. He had time to think, this is a setup, before a storm of bullets tore into him. As he fell, his dimming vision caught a glimpse of a figure standing calmly beside a massive abstract sculpture. Alexander. Their eyes met across the screaming crowd. In Alexander's gaze, Leo saw the ghost of that same cold amusement. Leo lay on the floor of an abandoned auto shop, staring at a rusted engine block dangling from a chain. The air smelled of oil and decay. He was done. The system's pleading was a distant buzz. A pained, ragged gasp cut through the silence. He turned his head. Alexander Sterling was curled on the concrete near a gutted sedan, his usually pristine clothes disheveled, his skin slick with sweat and flushed an unnatural red. His eyes, when they opened, were glazed with a feverish, animalistic heat. Recognition and a profound, searing contempt cut through the haze in them. Before Leo could process the situation, Alexander moved with a burst of desperate strength, tackling him. Leo's back slammed into the cold floor, driving the air from his lungs. Hands clawed at his shirt, buttons scattering. The air was cold on his exposed skin. The raw, primal fury of 3 unjust deaths exploded within Leo. All caution, all fear incinerated in that instant. He grabbed Alexander's wrists, his own fingers trembling with rage. He leaned up, his face inches from his own, and saw in those dilated pupils not just chemical need, but a deep, chilling revulsion. A wild, broken laugh escaped Leo. He closed the distance, his kiss not an act of passion, but of vengeance, a branding of his own suffering onto its source. "Don't worry," Leo whispered against his lips, the words a venomous parody of comfort. "I'll be gentle." The body beneath him stiffened. "Leo," Alexander snarled, the name a ragged accusation. So he did remember. The confirmation fueled Leo's reckless fury. Whether the drug had sapped his strength or some deeper shock had immobilized him, Alexander was suddenly shockingly vulnerable. A dark, triumphant thrill surged through Leo. He would not be the victim this time. "You're going to kill me?" Leo mocked, his voice low. "You've had 3 chances." He bit down on the junction of Alexander's neck and shoulder. Not a lover's mark, but a claim of retaliation. Alexander hissed, his body arching not in pleasure, but in strained defiance. The system's horrified shrieks were meaningless static. This was no longer about salvation. This was a settling of scores between two mirrored souls, one polished to a cruel shine by tragedy, the other cracked and sharpened by repeated betrayal. He awoke to pressure, relentless, crushing pressure on his windpipe. He opened his eyes to see Alexander leaning over him, his face pale and composed, all traces of the fever gone. His hair was a dark cascade against his shoulders. The expensive shirt hung open, revealing a landscape of bruises and bite marks that told a violent, intimate story. His eyes were flat, dead pools of intent. Leo didn't struggle. His fingers tightened around the handle of a rusted screwdriver he'd clutched even in sleep, its tip pressed firmly against Alexander's sternum. A silent, deadly standoff in the grimy dawn light. The coward finally grows a spine, Alexander observed, his voice hoarse. He glanced at the improvised weapon with a flicker of what might have been respect. Pathetic one. Leo knew his own patterns. In the face of overwhelming force, his instinct was to charm, to appease, to deploy a well-practiced vulnerability that had always disarmed his family. But that face, staring down at him with murderous calm, was immune to its own tricks. Would begging have helped? Leo rasped. No. Then shut up. Abruptly, the pressure vanished. Leo rolled to his side, coughing, the screwdriver still held tight. Alexander slowly gathered his torn clothing around himself, his movements precise despite a slight, telling stiffness. He stood, took a step, and froze. A fine sheen of sweat appeared on his brow. He exhaled slowly, the air leaving his lungs in a controlled, furious stream. Leo edged backward. "Carry me," Alexander commanded, not looking at him. "Why would I do that? So you can have me disappeared in your fancy apartment?" Alexander's smile was thin and dangerous. He raised a hand. Between his fingers was a slim, wicked-looking blade, its edge a dull black. "Do you really believe my current discomfort renders me harmless?" The math was bleakly simple. Disobedience meant death now. Obedience might mean death later, but later held a chance. He bent down. Alexander was surprisingly light. He draped himself over Leo's back, his breathing a shallow whisper against Leo's neck. The walk through the waking industrial district was conducted in heavy silence. The shame and shock of what he'd done began to cool in Leo's veins, replaced by a creeping, surreal dread. "The mighty special envoy," Leo finally muttered, unable to bear the quiet. "Brought low by a cheap date rape drug." A low chuckle vibrated against his spine. Still less embarrassing than dying 3 times to the same man. The old anger flared. "What did I ever do to you? I'm you. Hating me is just hating your own past." A cold, damp hand came up to trace the line of Leo's jaw, his cheekbone, his lips. The touch was clinical, exploring, like a scientist examining a disturbing specimen. Leo held perfectly still. "You're correct," Alexander murmured, his breath ghosting over Leo's ear. "I despise that past. That weak, entitled, oblivious boy. Leo should have stayed dead." He paused, then added softer, "Perhaps he did." They entered the sleek, steel and glass apartment building through a private garage elevator. The staff, a woman in a severe suit and a man with a security earpiece, stared openly, their professional masks slipping into stunned silence. A single glance from Alexander welded their mouths shut. An older man, the head of household, appeared. His eyes darted between the two identical faces, widened at the state of his employer, then narrowed with fury at Leo. "Sir, who is this person?" "My brother," Alexander said, the lie effortless. The man's name was Walter. He helped Leo maneuver Alexander onto a vast, low sofa in the minimalist living room. The moment Alexander's weight settled, a wave of palpable, icy fury radiated from him. Leo and Walter both took an involuntary step back. Alexander closed his eyes, his knuckles white where they gripped the sofa's edge. A bath, Walter. Now. Then he went limp, consciousness fleeing. A fever, the private doctor confirmed later, his tone carefully neutral. Brought on by infection and systemic stress. The cause of the initial systemic stress and the specific nature of the minor lacerations and abrasions were left diplomatically unmentioned, though the doctor discreetly left a tube of antibiotic ointment. Walter's face cycled through shades of purple and gray. Leo was confined to a secure room, not a cell, but a beautifully appointed guest suite with a lock on the outside. He felt nothing. No fear, just a numb exhaustion. Walter delivered meals with a glare that could curdle milk. He wasn't always like this, Walter said abruptly one evening, his anger seeming to deflate as he looked at Leo's face, at the unguarded expression there. When he was younger, he had your spark. The system, when pressed, reluctantly divulged fragments. The Sterling family, political rivals, an accident during an overseas trip, a fire. He and Walter were the only survivors. It painted a stark picture. A sheltered life shattered, a gentle spirit forged in a crucible of loss and betrayal into something hard and cutting. That understanding brought a sliver of pity, quickly buried under the bedrock of his own memories. The fall of the blade, the bloom of pain in his chest, the piercing shock of the bullets. Alexander returned from his duties at the Capitol, the scent of rain and a faint, coppery tang clinging to his tailored coat. He drew Leo into an embrace, burying his face in the crook of Leo's neck, a gesture that was possessive, not affectionate. When Leo tried to pull away, the cold point of a letter opener pressed against his ribs. He stopped. Alexander's hand slid to his waist, a parody of intimacy. Leo jerked at the touch. "Don't," Leo warned. Of course, Alexander murmured, agreeable. Then he turned Leo's head and kissed him, deep and consuming, a conquest. It was nothing like the violent clash in the auto shop. This was deliberate, acclaiming. "Had I known it would be like this," Alexander whispered later, his teeth scraping a fresh trail over Leo's collarbone, "I might have spared you the earlier drama." That night, in the dark silence of the bedroom, the question hung between them. Leo finally voiced it. "Why? You hate me. You control everything. Why let this happen?" Alexander watched him from the pillow, his face half in shadow. "Because I know you. I was you. If I took complete control, you'd find a way to blow us both up just to spite me. This requires a certain negotiation." The night of the Capitol Arts Gala arrived. Leo watched the scene unfold with a detached sense of déjà vu. The politicians, the diplomats, the glittering donors. Alexander's late, dramatic entrance. The sudden surge of masked gunmen from the service corridors. And then the impossible. A shimmering, silent rift tore open in the center of the marble floor. 3 figures tumbled out onto the bloody ground. A man in a navy suit, a younger man in a white dinner jacket, and a woman in an elegant cocktail dress. They looked utterly disoriented, modern and alien amidst the chaos. Alexander laughed softly, a sound of genuine, malicious delight. "More strays. Let's see if they survive the evening. I'll send flowers." Leo's blood ran cold. He knew those faces. He shoved Alexander. "You idiot! Look at them." The man in the navy suit, his father, looked up, his eyes wide with shock, staring at a fallen guard. The younger man, his brother, pushed himself up from a pool of something dark. Their mother stood frozen, a severed decorative ribbon from a podium coiled near her foot like a serpent. Alexander's smile vanished. In a blur of motion, he was moving, a sleek, lethal force. He disarmed a gunman with a brutal efficiency, clearing a path to the 3 stunned newcomers. With a sharp gesture, hidden security teams swarmed the room, ending the conflict in moments. Later, in the subdued quiet of the penthouse, after the explanations and the tears and the stunned silence from his family, Leo stood on the balcony. He looked down at the city lights, his hand closed around a small, smooth stone he'd picked up from a decorative bowl. He thought of the gala, of Alexander's effortless control, of the sheer theatricality of it all compared to his own messy, painful deaths. A cold, clear understanding crystallized. He had never been a pawn in Alexander's game. He had been a prop, disposable, used for mere effect. The system, sensing his darkening mood, ventured a question. "Aren't you afraid? After last time? If he wanted me dead, I would be," Leo said, his voice quiet. He turned the stone over in his palm. But I'm not the naive boy he remembers either. After their first night in the auto shop, he had begun a different kind of study. Not of politics or power, but of chemistry, using the penthouse's extensive digital archives and discreet, online purchases. The toxins were subtle, cumulative, keyed to a specific biological signature, his own. Their antidote was proximity, skin-to-skin contact, which only perpetuated the cycle. A dead man's switch woven into intimacy. He never spoke of it. Sometimes, in Alexander's embrace, he wondered if the other man knew. The thought didn't frighten him. Felt like balance. He walked back inside. Alexander was asleep. The harsh lines of his face softened, dark lashes fanning over his cheeks. Leo slid into bed beside him, fitting his body against the familiar curve of Alexander's back. He wrapped an arm around his waist, breathing in the scent of his own skin on the other man. In the darkness, the system's voice was a faint whisper. "You've both gone mad." Maybe, Leo thought, his eyes closing. He dreamed of a different first meeting in a sun-drenched city park. He'd been chasing a pickpocket, furious and out of breath. A hand had tapped his shoulder, holding out his stolen wallet. "Lose this?" the man asked. He was handsome, dressed in casual but expensive clothes, and his face was Leo's own mirror image. Leo, heart still pounding from the chase, had stammered his thanks. The man had smiled, a real smile that warmed his eyes. "No problem. I'm Alex, by the way." As he turned to leave, Leo impulsively called out, "Wait, do I know you?" Alex glanced back, the smile turning enigmatic, a hint of the future shadowing his gaze. "Alex Sterling. But once, a long time ago, you could have called me Leo."